Well, hello, everyone. I'm Michael Shawn. We just had the most amazing thing happen. I'm almost telling you this with tears in my eyes. There are so many things happening in the world right now, especially here in the United States, that honestly, it makes you pause and draw a breath and go, "Oh, Lord God, what's going to happen next?" And as I sat down and we began putting this show together, I thought, where is the good news, even in this season? But in the last couple of days, we began getting information at our studios at A-Team-PR here in Studio A, and we are overwhelmed by the good news that we didn't even ask for. It just began to show up here. For instance, let me start with this. I got a message from our old friend Stan Troy. Now, for those of you who don't remember, Stan was, he's been on our show a couple of times, at least. And he had a situation where he got a diagnosis of stage 4 cancer. We, here at this studio, were one of a handful of people that Stan broke the news to us, and we are so thankful for that. He's been a lifelong friend. The doctors didn't give him much of any hope. They said, "Stan, we'll do the best we can, but honestly, son, we don't think there's much we can do for you." Stan held strong. He started his treatments, and within just a few weeks, he went back to all those same specialists and found out that he was clean. That either the doctors were dead wrong or a miracle had taken place. That's what we like to believe. Well, we did a follow-up on Stan, ask around. Anybody knew what was happening with Stan Troy? And we got this message. It's a Stan Troy update from Stan Troy. People are asking, so here's an update on my health situation. I'm coming into the home stretch. This round of treatment will finish during the week after Thanksgiving. Scans will reveal the results, and I'm feeling all right. Thanks be to God. And Doc says it's looking good. Thank you for your prayers and thoughts. Live for today. We thought you might like that. Something else interesting we would also want to mention at this point. We've done the show for a few years now, and it is one of our policies not to mention holidays or special yearly events of any type, because our podcasts go up into a library, and people all over the world are listening to it at all different times. So you could be listening to something we produce, say, in this season, but not actually listening to it until next summer. So we do a generic style of production that doesn't talk about what's going on actually as far as holidays and special events. That being said, it's always struck me as, odd that the most magnificent season of the year is not mentioned on our podcast. Well, I just got to tell you that in this day and time, I don't feel like keeping my mouth shut about that. Now, I've been told that our policy is the same. And you see, you need to understand that this opening to our podcast is not produced until the podcast is completely produced. And then at the last minute, I walk in and say whatever's on my mind, and we open the show. In other words, I'm going to break the rules, and the rules are simply this. We love y'all. every one of you that are listening anywhere, any place, anytime. We want you to know that we care about you and appreciate you listening. And at this special time, we want to wish you Happy Hanukkah and or Merry Christmas. It means a lot to us to be able to tell you that. And we thank you for being a listener to the Free Range Texan podcast. So I guess we might as well kick it off. The following is an A-Team-PR production.
Welcome to the Free Range Texan podcast. We're kind of an escape hatch for everyday life. We know today's world has issues. Maybe that's just all the more reason to spend some time. So saddle up with a bunch of Free Range Texans. Here's one now, our host, Michael Shawn.
Free Range Texan, episode 65. Now searching far and wide around the world for ridiculous rules to break. I'm sorry, that's an inside joke. Well, we've got good stuff lined up on episode 65, y'all. Officer Chris Mitchell of the Lubbock, Texas Police Department. And let me tell you about this guy. He is not an official media spokesman with a list of carefully manicured public relations statements. But I'll tell you what he is. Chris Mitchell is just an honest cop. I know this about him because I know Chris. He deals with the negative aspects of the police-community relations debacle that is gripping our whole country. And he goes about his job each and every day. Chris opens up and talks about all of that. And we are secure here at our studio during this production of this podcast. I am told that our chief of security, Foxy the Wonder Dog, has in fact only detained one individual at our front gate. Apparently, they attempted to enter our studio in possession of a cupcake. Good dog, Foxy. Michael Shawn's Campfire is back with a tale from the New England coast, so I guess it's time to saddle up and get ready to ride. I know what you're thinking. What if? That can be dangerous, you know, thinking, what if? Like, what if you produced your own podcast? Well, now comes the if-onlys. If only you think I had a partner. Someone that listened to you enough to understand what's in your head and maybe even what's in your heart. Then they would understand the look and the feel of your podcast. Partners you could trust to edit exactly what you want in our state-of-the-art digital studio. Complete with your own non-published music and just the right amount of backup production for intros and outros. And we would even use portable microphones to help us make you the center of your podcast content. And you could do this from anywhere in the world. After your final edit of each episode, we would then upload your presentation to every podcast platform in the world through a universal hub that is the world's most successful of its kind. And it can all be simpler than you think. and promoting your podcast is something we would be glad to teach you. In fact, we are the producers of podcasts like The Free Range Texan and a number of others as well. Whether it's corporate or personal, that's what partners are for. I mean, if you're wondering, what if? Just go to freerangetexan.net and then click on the What If You Produced Your Own Podcast banner. You see, it's simpler and costs less than you think. That's freerangetexan.net and look for the What If You Produced Your Own Podcast or 18PR banner. After all, what if? Let's talk about it. Hello, everyone. On the Free Range Texan, it is always one of the things we love to do here is introduce you to people that we think a lot of. This is a friend of mine. This is the gentleman we mentioned a while ago. He is a police officer in Lubbock, Texas, and we are proud to have Chris Mitchell on the show with us. Chris, welcome to the Free Range Texan.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
I often thought it would be fun to interview you, Chris, because for the longest time, it seemed to me that you were not only a good guy, an interesting guy, but I began to notice that you kind of flew in the face of what is happening in popular media, presenting police officers as tyrants. How long have you been a police officer?
Just a little over 7 years. I started with Lubbock Police Department.
And for the people that don't know, Lubbock is a community of about 350,000, 250,000 in Lubbock proper, and then when the bedroom communities are added in, it is it's quite a place. It is one of the larger areas out here in West Texas, and you were the natural guy for us to tap out when we wanted to talk about what is happening with the police departments these days and police officers who had given years and years of their life to being a police officer and being a part of a community, and yet they seem to be popular fodder for whether it's the YouTube channel or any one of a number of television programs such as news programs and so on and so forth. And we're just seeing and hearing so much stuff. Chris, did you ever think that it would get to a point where people all over the United States would cry out that they want to defund their police departments and instead do something different? How does that make you feel?
Well, it's interesting because, the main purpose of policing is public safety. And I think defunding the police, it can be dangerous for, the community, for its people. So there have been instances where I think that the way that they've done it, as far as reappropriating funds to other means of dealing with certain types of calls and things like that, and we've even done some of that here in Lubbock. We have a crisis intervention team that has now implemented where they have a licensed counselor that is riding with one of the police officers, and I think that's great.
Yeah.
They go to a lot of the subjects where there's a mental subject involved, where they're having, a breakdown or they're feeling suicidal. A lot of calls to the crisis line that they refer to us, that those people that have been specially trained beyond even what a police officer gets, which we have to receive, crisis intervention training at length in the academy before we're licensed. And then it's a continual every year class that we have to update and hear about new things and be refreshed on how to deal with those things. So I think in some respects, a reappropriating of funds for the police can be good. But then I hear about in like Philadelphia where they've pretty much told police officers don't make traffic stops. And now they're going to implement an unarmed civilian traffic squad, which,
oh boy,
traffic stops can be some of the most dangerous things. I know a lot of those videos you mentioned on YouTube where, police officers pull a car over and somebody's armed, ambushes the officer as they're walking up, or something goes south. They realize they're going to jail. They start fighting, pull a gun, and things go south from there. So I think that things like that just don't make sense. We have a civilian parking control here in Lubbock, which is fine. They deal with cars that are unoccupied, that are parked in places that they shouldn't be. Very rarely, if ever, do they interact with people, so there's way less of a chance for them to get hurt or injured, or a civilian to, come at them hostile and get mad at them for, enforcing parking laws. But by and large, the defunding of it and saying that police need less money while also demanding that police have more training and that we don't know enough or do enough, and they just counteract each other. You can't have more training and have less funding.
You and I are friends, Chris, and we know each other outside of our professional responsibilities. Mm-hmm. And that's why you're here. You're a guy I could easily tap on and get on our podcast. But I also know you as a honest person, and about the last thing that you would expect to find when you see police departments being widely presented in media as tyrants. How does that make you feel?
Well, it's discouraging whenever you hear that, because having experience in policing and doing what we do every day, a lot of times I feel like, there's a very narrow view of what people see. There's they can't be inside the officer's head whenever he stops somebody for something. They can't be inside the suspect's head or the person that they're dealing with whenever that's going on. They don't know what they're thinking, and so that's a large part of that, to know what are we thinking when we stop someone for simply riding their bike on the wrong side of the street. Well, you're just messing with them. You're just doing it just for a power trip. Well, no, that's
a safety issue. Right.
And we've had a record number of pedestrian accidents, a lot of them involving, death. The pedestrians being hit by a car and dying, or bicyclists being hit by a car and dying. And so when we stop somebody, that's always in the back of my mind. Hey, this person is doing something unsafe. They may think it's silly for stopping them for, riding their bike on the wrong side of the road, or riding it without a light at night, or walking in the street when there's a sidewalk right there.
But you may have saved their life.
Right. Or someone else that saw me stop them and realized, oh, hey, they were not riding the way that they should have been. And so then that cautions them for next time of, we're keeping an eye out. We're making sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be safe. And, a lot of people throw that protect and serve kind of motto around.
Yeah, they do.
And say, oh, well, how were you protecting that person whenever you had to fight with them, or, whatever. Well, it's not necessarily about just protecting one person. We're protecting the community as a whole, or we're maybe protecting people that were put in danger by the person that we're arresting, and so I think having that thought process that we have to kind of color the interactions that people see, instead of seeing it as a power trip or seeing it as you're a tyrant or you just want to, bring the hammer down on these people for petty violations, when really the motive behind it is, public safety and making sure that people know the law and that they are safe.
Would it be fair for me to say to you, would you admit to the fact that there are police officers throughout the country that are, as described, tyrants? And for whatever reason, whatever's going on at home or whatever just happened on their last stop or whatever all they may be dealing with when they walk up to your car window, they are in no mood to be messed with. Those people exist, right?
Sure. Yeah, and that's disheartening whenever I do see videos where it seems like, and again, I don't know what the person's going through. Like you said, you don't know what they just encountered right before that. But it's disheartening to see when an officer, comes down really hard on somebody and there seems to be no apparent reason for why that's happening. And sure, I've seen those videos, and I'll be the first to say, yeah, that wasn't cool, or he should not have done that, or that could have been handled a different way. So it's not always sunshine and roses, like you said, and we can go from a super serious call that really took a toll on us to having to deal with, something totally different, and we've got to make that switch, and it's hard, to do that, and it's hard to leave stuff that's going on in your personal life away from work too, where it doesn't affect you and it's not always there in the back of your mind. But I think it's absolutely necessary, and it's a skill that police officers should have to kind of set that aside while we're at work. You're dealing with what you're dealing with at hand, deal with it the best way and the most professional way possible, and then move on to the next thing.
Do you really believe that when an officer is in a situation and for whatever reason has been, let's just use the word belligerent, but right now this is such a big deal. It is so in the media, and perhaps the media is partly to blame, but an officer can be really belligerent. Is the law actually the bottom line on all of his decision making, and he just applies himself in an unfortunate manner? Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I do, and I think that can be the case, because you can enforce the law politely. You can enforce the law rude. You could be rude to every single person you go into and do everything right by the book. Nobody's going to like you. You're probably not going to make any friends on the department or off. And, you're not going to make a name for yourself, whether good or bad. And not necessarily that it should be completely one way or completely the other. But there's an old movie, Patrick Swayze, Roadhouse. I don't know if you've seen that movie. Yeah. But there's when he's training some of the new guys, a quote that he uses that I've used before is, be nice until they give you a reason to not be nice. I don't know if that's exactly it, but something similar. And even so, I've found that being calm in the face of somebody screaming at you, continuing to talk with a calm voice, let them know that what they're doing is not affecting you and your response to that. And a lot of times it just kind of kills their whole attempt to try and work you up. But like you said, they can still enforce the law, follow the law, do things correctly, procedurally, and be rude. Whether that's the right thing to do or not, like I said, that's up to them. And I think it should be said too that a lot of people cry out for punishment for these officers when they see videos like that. And, he should be fired, or he should be charged, or he should be, suspended, or things like that. But what they don't realize is when that happens, the public may not be privy to that information. It may have already happened, but long before this video was released. The officer may have been suspended, fired, whatever, and they just don't know about it. And so having that kind of reaction afterward without knowing if there was that type of outcome.
So you've been a police officer for 7 years here in West Texas, in the metropolitan area of Lubbock, Texas. I guess you see everything here, except for I would just like to hold you up for a moment. No, I mean, put your hands down. No, I mean, when I say hold you up, I mean lift you up. And what the reason why is, and I'll just tell this to everybody inside the United States and outside the United States, in a world where major cities have cried to defund their police departments and now have over 100 extra murders this year alone in places like Chicago and New York, and where cities like Austin here in Texas have decided to defund their police department. And now many times you can call the police department and they will tell you, well, we're not going to respond at this point. We don't have the manpower to do that. But here, let me give you a list of questions for you to answer and do your own investigation on your robbery or your malicious thing done one way or another for local hoodlums that have gone in and destroyed a portion of their home or that sort of thing. And the police say, look, I'm sorry, we just can't get to that. Is anyone about to die? And you'll answer that yes or no. And based on that question, they decide if they're going to show up. How long is it going to be before regular, workaday, tax-paying people are going to say, hey, enough is enough? But yet, just in the last 30 days or so, in places like New York and Chicago and Northern California, there have been people going to the polls and voting, and they voted to continue to defund their police departments. How does that make you feel?
Well, yeah, it's discouraging for sure. And, they're losing people left and right just because the morale is so low. And, like you said earlier, they could be doing their job and still be admonished for trying to do what they're hired to do, to hold people responsible for things that they've done to uphold the law. And so there's officers leaving like crazy from jurisdictions like that where the pay is not very good and it's just not worth it to be constantly questioned on everything that you do every single day and to be punished for things that, you may have done everything right except for one little thing, and that's the thing they decide to punish you for.
You just mentioned pay, and that brought a big grin to my face. I'm sure you're wondering what I'm thinking. I'm going to tell you what it is, folks. I don't know who you are or where you are in this country, but I'll tell you this. Here in West Texas, we have voted to give our police departments and our sheriff deputies raises, 2 separate elections, and they both passed like flying colors because we want our police officers to know that we are behind them. And while there may be a few bad apples now and then, well, that's just house cleaning that we need to do. And everyone is aware now that a law enforcement officer is an asset to your neighborhood. And I just want to say, Chris, that makes me want to do the dance of joy, brother, because we're not hung up in that negative feeling that actually causes a lot of pain and suffering all around in major cities in the country. Yep. And I just wish there was some way to give the positive guys, the guys that go out every day and do good for our community, that provide safety for women and children and working families. There just needs to be a way that we can say, hey, thank you. We appreciate that, and we're sorry, too, about all of the negative crap that just continues to roll out.
Yeah.
It's like it's a spirit that is just alive and well in our communities right now. Yeah. It is not a positive thing.
I will say that living and working in West Texas and being in this community, being supported, the good encounters with, the public definitely outweigh the bad. And I can think of, off the top of my head, just this week working. Last night we were on a call, and it happened to be in front of Wiener Schnitzel. And this little girl walked in, and as she was walking past us, you could see her hold up her finger and count each one of us that was standing outside of our patrol vehicles there. And she went in, and we were wrapping up, and her mom came out, and she said, "Are you guys fixing to leave?" And you're like, "Yeah, we're about done." And she said, "Well, can you hold on a minute? My daughter, her dad's a police officer, my dad's a police officer, and she wanted to buy you guys ice cream cones." So she brought us each out an ice cream cone, and we had to make sure we ate it while she was there so she could know that her gift was well appreciated. And of course, I keep my back end. I've got a bag full of Beanie Babies that I hand out to kids on difficult calls, and anytime I see ones like that.
Yeah.
From that to I was on an accident in a parking lot, and a guy had my door open, and he just rolled up and he said, "Hey, I just want to thank you for what you do. We appreciate you." So I definitely say here in West Texas that we do appreciate the public and your support for us, and even just those little encounters that we have is just a thank you. Or somebody paid for my meal at Chick-fil-A the other day when I was rolling through trying to get dinner.
Well, Chris, I think police officers all over the United States have similar experiences. I think there are people in every state and people around the world in different countries that appreciate their law enforcement, and now especially since all this negative stuff has been happening, when they've really thought about it for the first time, and for the first time in a long time, that these guys are working members of the community just like the rest of us and doing the best that they can. And it's so unfortunately when there's a bad egg in the bunch.
Right.
But I know you guys do the best that you can to handle that as well.
Right. Yeah. And, it comes up from time to time, if not here, like you said, in other places. You see it on YouTube and things like that. And, it's just like any other profession, there's bad doctors that may be rude to people and not have a good bedside manner and don't do the things that they need to do with every single patient. And there's bad lawyers, and there's bad workers at McDonald's. It's in every single field. There can be people that maybe that's their attitude, and they just don't care. And, with policing being the profession that it is, and we are held to a higher standard, which I don't think is a bad thing. And I think we should be, in that case, then, if there are things that are brought to light, they definitely need to be taken care of. And if there's somebody that does something that they shouldn't have, and they were a little too heavy-handed, or they arrested somebody when, they weren't able to, and they shouldn't have, then definitely they should be reprimanded for that.
I remember when I was a young man growing up that you would ask a little kid, "What do you want to be?" And it would be a fireman, and quite often a policeman, or a doctor. Nobody wanted to be a lawyer. but my point is this. There was a time in this country where to be a policeman, we didn't even call them cops at that point. we referred to them as policemen, and that was a respectful term. And, we meant to say it that way. And to have a career as a law enforcement officer was a respected member of the community. Do you feel like that's been tarnished?
In some ways, but I think, even just recently we had Halloween, there's still a bunch of kids out there that were, wearing police officer uniforms and firefighter uniforms and stuff like that. So I think that by and large, even not just in this community in West Texas, but in the country, I think the large silent majority that even though they see these things, still has the trust that we'll take care of it if it's something that doesn't, somebody that doesn't need to be here or something that doesn't need to be happening. They still have that trust in law enforcement. It's the louder minority that sees these videos and makes knee-jerk reactions about the police department's not doing things that they should, or about police getting special treatment from DA's office because they're police officers and things like that, and being very loud about it. And then even the media magnifying that even more in echoing that, this is a problem. This is a main issue in America, that, police brutality and things like that they bring up all the time. And really, they're isolated incidents that happen in certain areas all over the country. And, sometimes it's unavoidable based on the suspect's actions and the things leading up to that. But I feel like I said, by and large, that the nation as a whole still supports law enforcement and believes that we are here to do the best that we can in making sure that everybody's safe and that the law is upheld.
I remember when I was a young man and first getting my driver's license, I remember my grandparents telling me, I remember my mom and dad telling me that if a police officer asks you for identification, you identify yourself. You don't need to know why or anything else, but you trust the fact that for some reason or another, he wants to know who you are. And unless you've got something you're ashamed of, you need to tell him. You need to identify yourself to law enforcement anytime they ask. And I remember that just being a household rule. And I was told that. It wasn't until I'm ashamed to say it, but until I was like in my 60s, that social media began pointing out the fact that many times when a police officer walks up to the window of your car and asks for your identification and begins asking you questions, that one, you don't have to give your identification, and two, you don't have to answer any questions. Now, they will sit there and tell you that over and over again on different forms of media. But Chris, what's the reality there?
So, specifically traffic stops, I can get to that, but there's different levels of interaction that a police officer may make with someone.
Yeah.
So there's what's called a consensual encounter, which is if I see you somewhere, I can just walk up just like anybody else would say and say, "Hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And if I have no reasonable suspicion to believe that you have committed a crime or about to commit a crime or involved with a crime,
yeah,
then you don't have to talk to me. You don't have to say anything. You can walk away at that point if it's consensual. So that's where, you get a lot of these auditors that on YouTube will ask, "Am I being detained?" That's fine to ask. And, if a police officer let you know that you are being detained, then definitely don't walk away from them. But, if I just walk up to you and say, "Hey, what's going on?" It may be a consensual encounter, and I may be asking you questions regarding something else. Maybe if you were possibly a witness to a crime, or if you were maybe you just match the description of somebody that we're looking for, either a missing person, a suspect, or something like that. So that's a consensual encounter. And if I ask for ID on a consensual encounter, in Texas anyway, you're not compelled to identify yourself. Now, then it steps up to an investigatory detention. So if I believe that you were involved in a crime, you're a suspect in a crime, you just committed a crime, and you're fleeing, or you're about to commit a crime, you have the tools of a crime, the ability to do it, things like that, then I can ask you to identify yourself. And in that case, I would say that it would be better to go ahead and do that. Again, it's not necessary in Texas. The only time that you are required to give your identification in Texas is after you have been arrested. So that would be the next level of detention that we get to, is the arrest. So if I have developed enough probable cause to arrest you, once you are arrested and I say, hey, you're under arrest for such and such, if you don't identify yourself then it becomes a crime of failure to identify. That being said, at any point before that, if I ask for identification and you give false identification, it's also called failure to identify.
Well, that's something different.
Right.
If you give false identification,
right.
That's a whole nother trail in the wrong direction there.
Right. So definitely, and another aspect of being police officer is making sure everybody's rights are upheld. I want to make sure that your rights are not violated by another citizen or by any type of government entity. So your right to remain silent absolutely is your right. And if you get arrested or if you get pulled over, like you said, if you get pulled over now, that has been ruled by case law that it is a detention. So you would need to identify yourself in order to be given the citation, so we know who you are. That way, if you don't take care of the citation for the traffic violation that you committed, then it can come back to a warrant and things like that. But even going so far as saying, say a police officer asks you, hey, do you know how fast you were going? You can say yes. That's fine. Well, how fast were you going? You don't have to answer that. The Fifth Amendment, you plead the Fifth, the right to remain silent is applicable anytime you're talking to a police officer. So if you don't want to say something to incriminate yourself, you don't have to. Hopefully the officer would know how fast you're going. So that's absolutely your right. You can hand your ID, driver's license, hand your insurance, and the police officer can do everything that we need to deal with the traffic stop.
I like the word that you used just now, hopefully. Hopefully he knows. But would you agree that many times they don't know, but he's okay with you trapping yourself, so to speak? That may not have been his original intent, but if you were doing 45 or 50 in a 35 and he didn't have any way to document that, other than maybe something that you would say, oh man, I'm late for work, yeah, I know I was going too fast, that sort of thing, then all of a sudden you've just built your case
right against
yourself.
Yeah.
So is that game played sometimes?
Yeah, and I mean, it's not really a game. It's just we want to make sure we have all the information from anybody that we can talk to. Yeah. On any type of call, a traffic stop, if it's a domestic, if it's an assault, if it's a theft. If I've got you on radar going 90 in a 75, and I've documented that, then. And my in-car DVR shows me catching up to you, then you don't really need anything else.
I was going to say, there's not much left to talk about at that point.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, kind of going back to the hot button things, and I've been watching the Kyle Rittenhouse trial going right now, and one of the prosecutor got an earful from the judge for mentioning that Kyle invoked his right to remain silent when they first brought him in that night, and the judge got all over him, like
tried to hold it against him.
Right, and that's not fair in any case. From a case where you're potentially being tried for ending the life of multiple people, whether in self-defense or not, I'm not going to hold it against you for saying I'm going to remain silent and ask for a lawyer.
Well, if he spoke to a lawyer, the first thing the lawyer would say is, don't say a word.
Right. And like I said, I'm not going to hold that against you. And, we are trained to ask questions and seek information and seek the truth. So I'm going to ask, if there's multiple people involved, like I said, I'm going to ask everybody as much as I can to get their point of view, because the truth is going to be somewhere in between everybody's point of view.
And that's your job.
Right. And so if you don't say anything, that may not necessarily mean that we don't have enough to arrest you or give you a ticket or anything else. So if you ID yourself and, if I'm going to ask you questions and you say I don't want to say anything, if the cuffs go on, then you just got to know that maybe we've got enough information to believe and have probable cause to believe that you committed some whatever you're being arrested for. And hopefully that wouldn't come from just a traffic stop, but there is a law in Texas too that if we can arrest someone for any offense inside of our presence, which includes traffic stops other than speeding, texting and driving an open container. So if you're committing a traffic violation, there is always the potential that instead of signing a citation and going on your way, you can go see the judge right then and there, which a lot of times includes going to see the judge at the jailhouse.
Yeah.
So.
And maybe not until the next day.
Right. Depending on what time it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, you need to understand that guys like Chris Mitchell can take their own time and their own concern about the way things are right now with public perception and the police departments and come and there is some risk involved unless there is an element of trust between their interviewer and themselves, and most of the time that's not the case, and come here literally and explain themselves how reality can be different from perception. We covered things on this interview that are not always comfortable for a lot of police officers. I know this guy, folks. He's the real deal. And he is an honest cop. And I just love and appreciate that. At least out here in West Texas, we've got police officers like you who come to the job most days and protect and serve. If one young person out there decides maybe to be a police officer, what's your advice?
Well, stay out of trouble, because that's one thing that they definitely, dive into your past and make sure that you haven't done anything that you shouldn't have. So, just always do what's right. Just try to be honest in everything. Listen to mom and dad, because you're going to be listening to people the rest of your life and following rules and things like that. And just start studying now. Just learn about the law. Learn about what you can and can't do and things like that, and go from there.
Chris Mitchell, Officer Chris Mitchell with the Lubbock, Texas Police Department, we thank you for being on our podcast. And personally, I feel like I have a clearer picture on some things that you came in and explained to us. You're welcome to come back anytime.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
You should take some time for yourself. with the best little podcast in Texas. Bring a friend and ride with the Free Range Texan podcast. Hello, I'm Michael Shawn. Welcome to our Campfire. It was a sky blue morning. One of those eerily calm days that too seldom visited the ragged isles of Shoals, 10 miles at sea off the coast of New Hampshire. The young writer was vacationing on the island of Appledore. He had risen early and hiked to a long, low-lying point to catch the sunrise. Sea, land, sky seemed to be motionless early that morning. It was that same stretch of ocean which wintry rage had driven ships against the rocks of Appledore, splintering them into kindling. Now showed not a ripple. No clouds sailed in the sky. No gulls circled overhead. It was as though time became frozen. Suddenly, with no warning at all, she stood beside him, so close he could have reached out and taken her arm. She seemed oblivious to him. She stood there, staring toward the calm seas. She was young, perhaps 20, remarkably beautiful, with a cascade of golden hair that touched her waist. Her dress was filmy white, as though woven of cobwebs. She'd slipped up so silently and materialized out of the dawn. Probably the wife of a young fisherman, the writer thought. Or perhaps a fiancé. Do you see him? He asked the girl, scanning the horizon for the silhouette of a fishing boat. She spun around. He had never seen eyes so blue and so sad. "He will come again," she murmured, then disappeared behind a boulder as noiselessly as she had come, her feet seemingly to float above the ground. A chill seized our young writer. For an instant he shuddered. Had he actually seen the girl? She seemed so unreal. Still, she had spoken. He was certain of that. Working for a newspaper in one of the nearby villages, he had heard of odd happenings on the Isles of Shoals. The islands were ripe with legends. Indeed, they had that very kind of look, as if prehistoric giants had come and scooped up a handful of rocky New England coast and hurled them into the sea. Even the names of the 7 islands had a storybook quality. Appledore, Cedar, Duck, and Smutty Nose, which belonged to the state of Maine, Londoners, Star, and White, which were part of New Hampshire. Dozens of lives had been lost in these islands. Fishermen caught in sudden storms, cargo ships blown from the sea lanes into the rocky shallows, pirate ships slipping too close to shore. And what of the girl? Could one so lovely be a ghost? She had appeared out of thin air, dissolved into the morning mist. The ground she had walked seemed untouched. A melancholy settled over the young writer. The golden girl drifted in and out of his dreams. She dominated his thoughts by day, luring him again and again to the point. He returned there each morning at dawn, and this same golden girl came on the silent breath of the early morning breeze, dressed in white, her hair shimmering in the dawn sunlight. Each appearance was the same. She arrived silently to stare at the horizon. Then she would turn, fix soulful eyes upon him, and whisper, "He will come again." Her words were always the same, and the young writer was certain now that she actually spoke. Obsessed now by her visits, he began inquiring about the girl. None of the islanders seemed to know her. Then, in a remote part of the island, he met an old fisherman who not only knew the Golden Lady, but had actually seen her on the point at dawn. "Comes only at dawn on a clear day," he said. "Comes only to the point." She wasn't an islander, but the Golden Girl loved one of Blackbeard's captains. She had been put ashore on the point to guard a treasure that he had buried there. The captain had promised to return for the girl and the treasure, but he never did. It's believed he was killed at sea. Blackbeard, that ferocious pirate, had plundered the Atlantic seaboard from the West Indies to Canada, terrorizing virtually everyone who lived within the sound of the surf, and leaving in his wake of cruelty scores of legends about buried treasure. So now, here, another treasure with a golden ghost to guard it. The girl was indeed a ghost, for all of this took place in 1826. Blackbeard had been captured and beheaded off the North Carolina Outer Banks. And what of the Golden Girl today? Does she stand yet on the low point of Appledore Island, guarding the gold buried there centuries ago? Some islanders say so, that if the morning is calm and the sea is glassy and the sun is golden, she will appear until her lover returns. It's just another tale from our campfire. We're glad you were here. I'm Michael Shawn. Adios, my friends. Thank you, Officer Chris Mitchell, for going above and beyond his normal duties and being our special guest on this podcast. We think Chris is one of the best examples of street-level law enforcement. He does, in fact, protect and serve. Hey, subscribing to our podcast or YouTube helps. Your subscription makes a difference. And we would have you know that ateampr.com could maybe help you produce your idea for a podcast. We have solutions for making your podcast happen from anywhere in the world. Just go to freerangetexan.net and click on the banner for creating your own podcast. That's a wrap on episode 65. Foxy, get in the pickup. Take 'em home, sweetie pie.
Thank y'all for listening to the Free Range Texan podcast, produced at 18PR Studios, out yonder in West Texas, with our host, who's been voted the hardest working man in podcasting, Michael Shawn. Feedback or submissions to our program can be submitted on our website, freerangetexan.net. That's freerangetexan.net. This is Sweetie Pie, on behalf of Michael Shawn and the crew here in Studio A, where we're all looking forward to spending time with you on our next episode of the Free Range Texan podcast. Y'all come back now, you hear?
An 18PR production. End transmission.
That's all. Can we go now, Dad?